On the night of October 12, 1928, the backstreets of Bloomsbury in London were unusually still. Rain had fallen earlier, and the cobblestones shone like black glass beneath the flickering lamps. The fog hung low, thicker than usual, curling around doorsteps and creeping under window panes. Londoners had lived with fog for centuries, but this one felt different, heavier, oppressive, as if it carried something more than dampness. The houses along the narrow street stood silent. Curtains were drawn, fires banked low. Only the faint sound of a horse cart, distant and muffled, broke the hush. It was the kind of night when most people stayed inside, grateful for warmth and candlelight. And yet, in one small brick workshop at the very end of the lane, something stirred. The neighbors had long whispered about that workshop. For months they had seen strange glows through its windows, lights that flickered unnaturally, too bright and too quick for ordinary lamps. Some claimed to hear a low thrumming late at night, as though a hive of bees were trapped behind the walls. Others swore the air itself felt different when they passed the doorway, a kind of pressure in the chest, a tingling on the skin. Inside, the man responsible for these disturbances was hard at work. Dr. Edward Mallory, physicist, inventor, and, some would say, madman. But on this night, his work reached its breaking point. At precisely 10 minutes past 11, the silence shattered. The sound came suddenly, violently. Later accounts would never agree on what it was. A dressmaker across the street insisted it was like the heavens ripping apart. A delivery boy who happened to be walking past claimed it was more like every window pane in the world shattering at once. A retired soldier, his nerves still frayed from the trenches, swore it was the crack of artillery fire, so close it rattled the teeth in his skull. Whatever it was, the sound seemed to come not from the street, not from above, but from within the workshop itself, as if the walls could no longer contain what was happening inside. Then came the light. It burst through the cracks of the shutters and under the edges of the door, spilling onto the fog like liquid fire. Neighbors rushed to their windows, pulling aside curtains, squinting into the night. What they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The light was not steady, not natural. It pulsed, changing color with each beat. White so blinding it turned shadows into stark etchings, green that sickened the stomach, violet so deep it stained the fog. It seemed alive, as though breathing, expanding, contracting, drawing the mist toward it, then repelling it again. Some swore they saw shapes inside the glow, silhouettes moving, as if more than one figure stood within the workshop. But when they leaned closer, straining their eyes, the figures twisted, bent, dissolved into nothing. And then, silence. The light snapped out. The hum vanished. The fog returned, heavy and dark. The workshop stood black and still, its windows blank. For a moment, the entire street seemed frozen. Not even the dogs barked. And then, without warning, the door crashed open. A woman stumbled into the street. Her hair was scorched, her skin ghostly pale. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She was recognized immediately, Clara Hensley, the assistant who had been working with Dr. Mallory for the past year. Neighbors rushed to her aid, but she flinched from their touch, as though even the brush of fabric against her skin burned. Her lips trembled, forming a single word again and again. "Gone," she whispered. Gone. Inside, the workshop was locked from within. The police, summoned quickly, forced their way through the heavy door. What they found defied explanation. The air was thick, metallic, carrying the sharp tang of ozone. Papers were scattered everywhere, many of them singed at the edges, the ink blurred as though the very air had sweated. And in the center of the room, taking up nearly half the floor, stood the machine. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. A tangled architecture of copper coils, polished mirrors, glass tubes filled with flickering light, and wires that seemed to have no clear beginning or end. Some pieces still crackled faintly, others emitted a low vibration that could be felt more than heard. But there was no sign of Dr. Edward Mallory. Not a body. Not a trace of escape. Only his spectacles, lying cracked on the floor, one lens shattered, the other reflecting the strange coils above. One constable would later swear that the walls themselves seemed to lean inward, as though the room had been compressed, squeezed by some invisible force. Another reported feeling as though the air resisted him, every step like wading through water. The official report called it an electrical accident. But among the neighbors, the whispers spread faster than fire. Some believed Mallory had killed himself with his own invention, reduced to nothing by forces too powerful for man to control. Others believed he had succeeded, that he had stepped through his machine into another realm, another time, another dimension. And still others whispered a darker possibility, that Mallory had not left at all, that he remained inside, caught forever in the coils of his creation, trapped in a place where no one could follow. London has known its share of mysteries. The foggy alleys of Whitechapel, the haunted ruins of plague pits, the endless whispers of war. But in 1928, it was the disappearance of Edward Mallory that cast the deepest shadow. For here was not just a tragedy, not just a crime, but a question that gnawed at the city's heart. Where had he gone? And what, exactly, had he unleashed when he vanished? The faint hum returns, lingering like a breath on the back of the neck before cutting abruptly to silence. To understand the night Edward Mallory vanished, we have to step back. To London, 1928. The city was a paradox. On the surface, it glittered with the optimism of the post-war years. Jazz drifted from dance halls, motorcars honked through crowded avenues, and neon lights began to glow along Piccadilly Circus, promising a modern future. The air smelled of cigarette smoke, petrol, and the faint perfume of prosperity. But beneath that brightness was something else. Something unsettled. The First World War had ended just 10 years earlier, and its scars were still fresh. Thousands of veterans limped through the streets, their faces shadowed by memories they could never put into words. Widows wore black long after mourning had officially ended. Whole neighborhoods had lost sons, fathers, brothers. And with that grief came a fascination with what lay beyond death. Seances became fashionable. Mediums advertised in newspapers. Tables knocked and glasses slid across polished wood in drawing rooms from Mayfair to the East End. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, spent his later years traveling Britain, preaching the reality of spirits. People longed to believe their loved ones could still be reached. At the same time, science itself seemed on the verge of miracles. Einstein's theories had made their way into popular magazines, promising a universe where time and space bent and curved. Marie Curie's radium glowed eerily in laboratories, hailed as both a cure and a curse. Airplanes had crossed the Atlantic. Radios carried voices across oceans. What once belonged to fantasy was becoming fact, and the boundary between the two was thinner than ever before. Londoners lived in that tension, caught between grief and hope, superstition and science. And nowhere did those currents collide more sharply than in Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury was not the London of postcard fame. It wasn't Tower Bridge or Buckingham Palace. It was a district of scholars, eccentrics, writers, and experimenters. Here, in terraced houses with narrow windows and creaking staircases, ideas were tested, argued, and sometimes lost to history. It was in Bloomsbury that poets like Virginia Woolf and her circle wrestled with the meaning of life in a fractured world. It was in Bloomsbury that obscure journals published theories few would ever read. And it was in Bloomsbury, on a quiet side street, that Edward Mallory built his workshop. Mallory was not famous. He was not celebrated. In truth, most Londoners would not have recognized his name at all. He was one of hundreds of private thinkers working in obscurity, chasing ideas too strange for universities, too dangerous for investors. But to the neighbors who passed his workshop each day, he was impossible to ignore. They remembered the way his windows glowed at odd hours, long after the city had gone to sleep. They remembered the hum of machinery that seemed to vibrate through the bones. They remembered Clara, his assistant, hurrying in and out with stacks of books and bundles of wire. And they remembered his eyes. Mallory was tall, thin, his hair already streaked with grey though he was barely 40. His clothes were plain, but his gaze, sharp, restless, seemed always to look beyond the person in front of him, as if measuring some invisible horizon. He spoke politely enough when forced to, but conversation with him was unsettling. One neighbor swore that when Mallory looked at her, she felt as though he was watching not her, but the air around her, as though expecting it to ripple. The city itself fed into the unease. London in the 1920s was a place of contrasts. In Mayfair, flappers danced in glittering gowns, their laughter spilling into the streets. In Whitechapel, families still crowded into one-room flats, the air heavy with coal smoke and hunger. Street lamps glowed electric in the West End, but just blocks away gaslights flickered dimly, fighting the fog. Fog. Always the fog. It was more than weather. It was atmosphere, a presence. At night, it rolled through the city like a living thing, curling through alleys, swallowing entire blocks. To some, it was comforting, a blanket that softened the sharp edges of the world. To others, it was suffocating, a reminder of London's darker history, of Jack the Ripper stalking Whitechapel, of bodies hidden in shadow, of secrets never meant to be seen. On nights like October 12, 1928, the fog seemed almost purposeful. The newspapers, too, reflected the unease. One page celebrated the triumph of modernity. New cars, new buildings, the promise of progress. The next carried headlines of political unrest, of economic uncertainty, of crimes that seemed almost supernatural. Children vanishing. Fires with no clear cause. Shadows that moved where they shouldn't. It was in that world, half modern, half haunted, that Mallory's work took shape. He had studied at Cambridge briefly, before abandoning the university under circumstances never fully explained. Some said he argued too fiercely with his professors. Others whispered he was caught conducting experiments considered unsafe, even dangerous. Whatever the truth, he left academia with a reputation. Brilliant, erratic, untrustworthy. But Mallory did not stop. He believed the fabric of reality itself could be bent. That time, space, and energy were not fixed, but pliable. That with the right equations, the right machine, one could step beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world. To most, this was madness. To Mallory, it was destiny. And so, while London danced and mourned, while fog rolled and radios crackled, Edward Mallory built. The machine took months, years, to assemble. Its parts came from all over, coils from a supplier in Manchester, glass tubes from a chemist in Soho, mirrors from a disused observatory. Some neighbors swore they saw delivermen carrying crates marked with strange symbols, crates that seemed to hum even before they were opened. And through it all, Clara Hensley remained at his side. Clara was young, no more than 25, her hair cropped short in the fashion of the day. She was bright, serious, and fiercely loyal. While others dismissed Mallory as unhinged, she believed in his vision. It was she who kept his notes organized, who soothed his tempers, who brought him tea when he forgot to eat. She would later say, before she refused to speak of him altogether, that she believed Mallory was building something the world wasn't ready for. And perhaps she was right. Because by the autumn of 1928, the machine was nearly complete. And the air in Bloomsbury seemed to know it. Neighbors swore the fog grew thicker around the workshop. Cats hissed when they passed the door. A postman claimed his watch stopped every time he delivered a letter there. A child playing marbles in the street dropped one and swore it rolled uphill, straight toward Mallory's window. Perhaps these were only stories, built from gossip and fear. Or perhaps the city itself was warning them. Either way, the night of October 12th was inevitable. The night when science, superstition, and grief collided. The night Edward Mallory vanished. Edward Mallory was, by every account, a man who lived too far inside his own mind. Those who knew him at Cambridge described him as brilliant, but difficult. His notebooks, those that survive, are filled not only with equations but with drawings. Spirals, mirrored shapes, labyrinths that seem to wind in on themselves. One professor later remarked, he thought in patterns the rest of us couldn't see. That was his genius. And his curse. After his departure from the university, Mallory withdrew into his Bloomsbury workshop, surfacing only rarely. He lived simply, almost ascetically. His meals were sparse, his clothes threadbare, but his eyes, always, burned with purpose. What exactly drove him remains debated. Some believed he sought recognition, to prove the world wrong. Others whispered that he was haunted by the loss of his younger brother, a soldier killed at the Somme in 1916. If so, perhaps Mallory's obsession with piercing reality was less about glory and more about grief. A way to undo the cruel mathematics of war. But Mallory was not alone. Clara Hensley had first met him at a lecture on the philosophy of science in 1923. While most students found Mallory's words incomprehensible, Clara lingered afterward, asking questions. He saw in her a mind unafraid of the unknown. She saw in him a man on the edge of discovery. Their relationship was not romantic, at least, no one ever proved it was. But it was intense, forged in late nights, in ink-stained hands, in whispered debates over candlelight. Clara became not only his assistant, but his anchor. Where Mallory was erratic, Clara was steady. Where he raged at obstacles, she quietly solved them. Without her, it is doubtful the machine would ever have been built. And then there was Sir Reginald Pembroke. Pembroke was Mallory's unlikely patron, a retired army officer turned investor. He had made his fortune in shipping and spent his later years dabbling in eccentric projects. Archaeological digs, aeronautics, even an ill-fated attempt to fund a perpetual motion device. Where others saw Mallory as a dangerous crank, Pembroke saw potential. He financed the purchase of rare metals, specialized glass, and, most importantly, he protected Mallory from the ridicule of polite society. But his motives were not entirely altruistic. Pembroke had lost a son in the war, much as Mallory had lost a brother. He once confessed, half-drunk at his club, that he hoped Mallory's invention might bend the veil of death itself. And so, by the autumn of 1928, the stage was set. 3 figures, one brilliant, one loyal, one desperate, circled a machine that none of them fully understood. The machine itself defied simple description. Witnesses who glimpsed it through the workshop's open door spoke of coils. Taller than a man, copper wires snaking like veins, glass tubes filled with a faintly luminous gas. At its center stood a chair, not unlike a dentist's chair, surrounded by mirrors angled in ways that made the air shimmer. When the machine was idle, it looked ungainly, almost ridiculous. But when powered on, something happened. The air seemed to thicken, as if charged. Dust hung motionless. Shadows bent. One boy swore the sound of his own heartbeat doubled as he passed. Clara's diary entries, later seized by the police, described the preparations in chilling detail. October 8, 1928. Edward says we are close. He speaks of alignment as if it were destiny. The machine groans like something alive. Sometimes I hear it when it isn't running. October 10th. Sir Reginald insists he must witness the trial. Edward resists but cannot refuse. I fear what will come of it. The fog presses against the windows as though listening. And finally, the entry from the evening of October 12th. It begins tonight. Edward believes he will step beyond. I cannot shake the dread that he will not return. That night, neighbors recalled a strange stillness settling over Bloomsbury. The fog was thicker than usual, muffling sound, swallowing lamplight. One woman swore her canary refused to sing, wings fluttering violently against the cage. A postman claimed the street felt deserted, though he saw figures moving in the mist, figures that vanished when approached. Inside the workshop, preparations were meticulous. Mallory adjusted dials with trembling hands, Clara scribbled notes, and Pembroke, seated stiffly in the corner, watched with a mixture of awe and fear. At 10:14 p.m., the machine came alive. Electricity surged through coils, crackling blue. The glass tubes glowed faintly green, their contents swirling as if stirred by an invisible hand. Mirrors caught the light and fractured it into shifting patterns across the walls. The air itself began to hum, a low, bone-deep vibration that made Clara's teeth ache. Mallory strapped himself into the chair. His voice was steady, though his face shone with sweat. Reality, he declared, is not fixed. Tonight, we will prove it. Clara begged him to wait, to test with objects first. Pembroke murmured a prayer under his breath. But Mallory's eyes were elsewhere, already fixed on horizons unseen. The machine intensified. The hum rose to a whine. Light bent around Mallory's figure, warping him, stretching him. For a moment, Clara thought she saw two of him, overlapping, flickering, as though time itself had stuttered. Then came the scream. Not Mallory's. The machine's. Metal shrieked against metal. Glass threatened to burst. The entire workshop shook as if caught in a storm. Clara lunged forward, but Pembroke pulled her back, shouting that to touch him now would be fatal. And then, silence. When the light cleared, the chair was empty. Edward Mallory was gone. The straps hung loose, unbroken. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something foul, like burned hair. The mirrors were cracked. The glass tubes had shattered. But of Mallory, not a trace remained. Clara collapsed, sobbing. Pembroke staggered to the chair, touching it as though to assure himself it was real. Both later gave statements to the police, though their words differed in key ways. Clara described Mallory dissolving, as if melting into the light. Pembroke claimed he saw Mallory step forward, as though through a doorway invisible to the rest. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Edward Mallory had vanished. News of the disappearance spread quickly. By morning, rumors filled the papers. Scientist dematerializes in own machine. Bloomsbury mystery stuns city. Witnesses swear man vanished into thin air. The workshop was sealed, investigated, its strange machinery carted away to storage. But Mallory was never found. Not that night, not the next day, not in the years to come. Some believed he had perished in an accident, his body obliterated by forces unknown. Others whispered he had succeeded, that he had stepped into another realm, another time, another world. Clara refused to speak of him again. Pembroke retreated into silence, dying within a year. And the workshop itself was abandoned. Locals swore strange noises lingered there for months. Hums in the night, lights flickering behind broken windows. Children dared each other to press their ears to the door, and some claimed they heard Mallory's voice, faint, calling from beyond. But when the city finally demolished the building, they found nothing. Nothing except a single notebook, charred at the edges, containing only 3 words on its final page. It was open. History remembers facts. But mysteries, true mysteries, are carried in fragments. In words scribbled in journals, in testimonies recorded by hand, in clippings yellowed with age. And the disappearance of Edward Mallory left behind more fragments than answers. What follows are the accounts of those who claim to have seen, or felt, or known something on the night of October 12, 1928. None align perfectly. Perhaps that is why they still disturb us. The Times, October 14, 1928 headline, Bloomsbury scientist missing in extraordinary circumstances. Edward Alistair Mallory, 42, of Woburn Walk, has been reported missing following what witnesses describe as a scientific demonstration in his private workshop late Friday night. Police officials, upon entering the premises, discovered unusual electrical equipment, much of it damaged, with signs of fire. No body was found. Sir Reginald Pembroke, present at the event, informed reporters that Mr. Mallory stepped into his machine and vanished before our very eyes. Miss Clara Hensley, Mallory's assistant, gave a statement but has since declined further comment. Scotland Yard has yet to issue an official explanation. Neighbours, however, whisper of unearthly lights, strange vibrations, and a foul odour said to linger still. Police testimony transcript, recovered from Scotland Yard archives, dated October 16, 1928. Inspector Harold Keane interviewing Clara Hensley Keane. In your own words, Miss Hensley, describe what you saw. Hensley. He strapped himself into the chair. He looked calm, calmer than I'd ever seen him. The machine began to glow. The air, it thickened. It was like breathing through water. Keane. Did he speak? Hensley. Yes. He said, the veil is thin. And then he was gone. Not burned. Not broken. Gone. Keane. Gone where? Hensley. Pause. Inspector. If I knew that, do you think I would be here? Testimony of Mrs. Agnes Potter. Neighbor, age 63. I was in my front room, knitting. I heard a sound like a train whistle, only far off. Then my lamp flickered. When I looked outside, the fog had turned greenish, like swamp water. And there was a shape in it. A figure, tall, thin, not moving right. I swear to you, it wasn't natural. I closed the curtains and prayed until morning. Diary of Edward Mallory, fragment, recovered from workshop, September 29, 1928, test 14, partial success. Light bent. My hand appeared, wrong. Clara insists on caution, but time is not on my side. Each failure draws it closer. Each success pulls me further. October 5th, Pembroke grows impatient. He does not understand. This is not invention, it is revelation. Something speaks through the machine. Not in words, but in patterns, in pressure. I feel it watching when I sleep. October 11th. Tomorrow I step through. If I do not return, let it be known, I chose to go. The Daily Herald, October 17th, 1928 headline, The Vanishing Scientist, Trick or Tragedy. Public opinion is divided on the case of Edward Mallory. Skeptics argue the man staged his disappearance to escape debts or disgrace, citing his erratic past at Cambridge. Others whisper of experiments with dimensions beyond our own. Scotland Yard maintains there is no evidence of foul play, yet rumours abound of officers who refuse to remain in the workshop after nightfall, citing unease, dizziness, and, most strangely, voices in the walls. Until Mallory is found, alive or dead, the case remains open. Extract from the Journal of Sir Reginald Pembroke, found after his death, 1929, I see him still. Not gone, not dead, but moving elsewhere, like a man behind glass. His mouth opened as the light swallowed him. Did he scream? Or was he laughing? At night, when I close my eyes, the patterns swim. Circles upon circles. I think I hear his voice in the static of the wireless. He is calling. Or warning. I cannot tell. Anonymous letter to the Observer, never published, found in archives, do not be fooled. Mallory was no victim. He built the doorway knowing what waited on the other side. He invited it. The machine was not an accident. It was a beacon. Ask the neighbors what they saw in the fog. Ask the children why they no longer play near Woburn Walk. They know. I tell you this, Mallory is not lost. He is here. Closer than you think. Oral testimony, collected 1954, by Folklore Society, Mr. Henry Clark, recalling as a boy, we dared each other to look through the cracks of the boarded-up workshop. I saw something move inside, like a figure pacing. But the boards were solid, no way in. I never went back. My friend Peter did, though. He swore he heard a voice whisper his name. 3 weeks later, he drowned in the canal. I never forgot. So many voices. So many contradictions. A scientist who vanished into light. A neighbor who saw a figure in the fog. A patron who heard voices in the radio static. Individually, they are fragments. But together, they form a mosaic too strange to ignore. And always, at the center, that machine. Broken, dismantled, locked away in storage. And yet, according to more than one police officer, it sometimes hummed, faintly, even when unpowered. Edward Mallory had vanished. His workshop was sealed. His machine dismantled. But in the weeks and months that followed, Bloomsbury itself began to change. And those who lived closest to Woburn Walk would never forget what came next. The fog that stayed London was no stranger to fog. It rolled in from the Thames, thickened by coal smoke, swallowing the city in shades of grey. But after October 12th, the fog around Mallory's workshop seemed different. Neighbours described it as heavier, clinging to skin like oil. Street lamps struggled to pierce it. Sound carried strangely, footsteps echoed too long, voices travelled at odd angles. More than one resident swore the fog pulsed, as if breathing. Mrs. Agnes Potter, the widow who lived opposite, told a visiting reporter, the air itself changed. You'd walk past his place and feel watched. Not by people, mind you, but by the fog itself. As if it wanted you to step closer. As if it knew you. By late October, entire families moved away. Those who remained boarded their windows, lit candles at all hours, and spoke of Mallory's street in hushed tones. The first death on November 3rd, less than a month after Mallory's disappearance, a constable named Thomas Ridley was found dead at the corner of Woburn Walk. Ridley had been assigned night patrol in the area after repeated reports of trespassing youths. His body was discovered just before dawn, slumped against a lamppost. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle. His face, however, was contorted in terror, eyes wide, mouth open as though mid-scream. The coroner listed the cause as cardiac failure, but whispers spread. The attending physician confided to colleagues that Ridley's pupils were dilated as though he had seen something unspeakable in his final moments. And when his pockets were searched, a scrap of paper was found. On it, in Ridley's own hand, 3 words, "It followed me." Children's games by November, the abandoned workshop had become the subject of dares. Children from nearby streets would creep to its boarded doors, press their ears against the cracks, and claim to hear faint humming. One boy, Samuel Green, age 11, later gave an account in adulthood. It sounded like bees, but deeper. And if you listened long enough, the hum began to say things. Not words, exactly, more like a voice just out of reach. My mate George swore it said his name. I told him to stop listening. He didn't. George Partridge vanished 2 weeks later while walking home from school. His satchel was found in the fog near Woburn Walk. His body was never recovered. Police dismissed it as a runaway case. Locals did not. Pembroke's decline, Sir Reginald Pembroke, Mallory's patron, did not escape the contagion of fear. In the months following the experiment, his health declined rapidly. Servants reported him pacing at all hours, muttering about circles within circles and Mallory's doorway. One footman overheard him speaking to the radio late at night, as though conversing with someone on the other side of static. He claimed Mallory's voice answered back. On December 12th, Pembroke was found dead in his study. He had locked the door from within. The cause was listed as suicide by overdose, though his physician noted no evidence of poison. What was found, however, was a page torn from his journal, smeared with ink and frantic writing. He is not gone. He is waiting. And he is not alone. The street that wouldn't stay quiet, the area around the workshop, gained a reputation. Carriages and later motorcars avoided it. Residents refused to walk past after sunset. Street lamps flickered and burned out more often there than anywhere else in the borough. Stranger still were the reports of sound. In December, a coal deliverman swore he heard machinery whirring inside the boarded-up workshop, though all equipment had been confiscated weeks earlier. A seamstress passing at dawn claimed she heard sobbing from within, though when constables forced the door, the room was empty. And then came the singing. On January 4, 1929, several neighbors independently reported hearing a low chorus drifting through the fog around midnight. The voices, male, female, child, rose and fell in strange harmonies. One described it as a hymn in a language I didn't know but almost remembered. Another insisted it was Mallory's own voice, woven among the others. The police investigated. They found nothing. Clara's silence through all of this. Clara Hensley remained. She refused journalists, avoided neighbors, and lived in near seclusion. But a single fragment of her writing from that winter survives, discovered decades later among university archives. It reads, "The machine did not fail. It opened. He crossed, and something crossed back. I hear it at night, pacing, breathing, waiting for me to finish what he began. I cannot. I must not." Shortly after, Clara vanished. She left no trace, no belongings, no forwarding address. Some claimed she fled abroad. Others whispered she was claimed by the same force that took Mallory. The spread what began on one street seemed to ripple outward. By spring of 1929, reports of strange phenomena appeared across Bloomsbury. Watches stopping at 10:14 p.m., the exact minute Mallory vanished. Mirrors cracking without cause. Entire rooms turning cold. A clerk at the British Museum resigned after claiming he saw a tall, thin figure reflected in the glass of an exhibit case, a figure that was not there when he turned. A young woman was hospitalized after walking into the fog near Woburn Walk and emerging hours later, unable to account for the missing time. Her only words to doctors, "It showed me what he saw." She never spoke again. The official record insists Edward Mallory's case ended with his disappearance. That what followed were nothing but rumors, exaggerations, hysteria. But too many saw. Too many heard. Too many vanished. Something had begun the night Mallory strapped himself into that chair. Something that could not be boarded up, or dismantled, or explained away. And as the months turned into years, Londoners came to understand a terrible truth. Mallory had not simply left. He had left something behind. After months of unexplained disappearances, deaths, and accounts too numerous to dismiss, the authorities faced a decision. Either accept the rumors that Mallory had awakened something beyond comprehension, or seek to prove, with all the rigor of science, that nothing extraordinary had occurred. And so they called in the men of learning, the physicians, the physicists, the experts in mind and matter, hoping to close the door Mallory had opened. The medical examinations in early 1929, a team from St. Bartholomew's Hospital reviewed every death tied, however loosely, to Woburn Walk. Constable Ridley, dead of cardiac failure. Sir Reginald Pembroke, dead by apparent overdose. The missing children. The silence of Clara Hensley. The doctors sought patterns, clinical causes. They found none. Autopsies revealed no toxins, no trauma, no infection. Only one anomaly stood out. In each case examined, the vitreous humor of the eyes had clouded prematurely, as if decay had set in within minutes of death. The coroner noted, "It is as though they had seen something that burned the eyes from within, though the tissue remains intact." The report was quietly shelved. The psychiatrists, if not physical, then perhaps mental. Dr. William Farnsworth, a rising psychiatrist at King's College, was tasked with interviewing witnesses. He spoke with neighbors, with children who played near the fog, even with the coal deliverman who swore he heard the machine hum. His conclusion was damning: mass hysteria. The fog acts as a natural amplifier of fear. In a community primed by rumors of Mallory's machine, every sound becomes ominous, every shadow a phantom. These accounts, though sincere, are the byproduct of shared delusion. But Farnsworth's confidence faltered when he visited the site himself. Later, in a private letter to a colleague, he confessed, "Standing there, I felt the weight of something vast pressing upon me. It was not sound, nor sight, but a pressure in the mind itself. As though my thoughts were being observed. I left quickly. My official report will not contain this." The physicists in March 1929, the Royal Institution dispatched 3 physicists to examine the confiscated fragments of Mallory's machine. Among them was Dr. Leonard Chalmers, an expert in electromagnetic theory. Chalmers reconstructed portions of Mallory's notes, diagrams of coils wound in spirals, equations hinting at non-Euclidean geometry, and curious references to vibrational gateways. Chalmers dismissed much of it as nonsense, but one passage troubled him: "At sufficient resonance, the barrier is thin. Matter need not travel. Only consciousness. Only presence." The physicists attempted to recreate Mallory's experiment on a smaller scale. Using copper coils, Tesla tubes, and a high-voltage supply, they generated a low-frequency hum approximating Mallory's design. What followed unsettled even the skeptics. The lab lights dimmed. Instruments flickered wildly. One assistant swore he saw a figure standing behind Chalmers. Tall, indistinct, gone in an instant. The experiment was halted. Chalmers later admitted privately, "We had not built Mallory's machine, only a shadow of it." And yet, something responded. The institution ordered the study abandoned. The fragments were sealed away in the archives, labeled unverified electrical apparatus, not for demonstration. The skeptics not all were convinced. Professor Henry Albright, a vocal critic of parapsychology, published a scathing essay in the Times. To invoke the supernatural is to surrender inquiry. Mallory was no visionary but a fool. His death is tragic, yes, but it has spawned an epidemic of credulity. The so-called Woburn Walk phenomena will vanish the moment the public ceases to indulge it. Yet only weeks after his essay appeared, Albright himself was found unconscious in his study. His notes lay scattered, ink smeared into jagged spirals. He never regained full speech, and for the rest of his life, repeated only one phrase to anyone who visited: the door was open. The door was open. The failed containment in May 1929, officials attempted a final measure, sealing Mallory's workshop with lead panels, as if to smother radiation. Workmen reported unease as they labored, tools slipping, lights flickering. One collapsed mid-shift, babbling about a hand in the fog. When the lead was finally secured, the street quieted, briefly. For 3 nights, there were no reports. No fog. No whispers. No deaths. Then, on the 4th night, the humming returned, louder than ever. And neighbors swore they saw the panels bulge outward, as though something inside pressed to escape. The project was abandoned. The workshop was left as it was, an uneasy truce with whatever lingered within. A private manuscript in late 1929, one final document surfaced. Written by Dr. Leonard Chalmers, it was never published, but discovered decades later in his estate. Mallory was neither mad nor mistaken. He succeeded. His machine resonated with something real, something vast. But it was not travel he achieved. It was invitation. He called to the other side, and it answered. We may dismiss it, bury it, deny it, but the response remains. The barrier has been weakened, and each retelling, each recollection, strengthens the echo. If we speak his name, we call again. The scientists came. They measured, they probed, they rationalized. But in the end, they left with the same conclusion as the neighbors, the widows, the children who dared to listen at the cracks in the boards. Something had answered Mallory, and science, for all its rigor, could not silence it. By the summer of 1929, the rumors surrounding Edward Mallory had become more than whispers. They were headlines. The Daily Express ran stories of the Bloomsbury curse. The Illustrated London News published sketches of Mallory's face beside shadowed doorways. And so, inevitably, came the night when curiosity and fear collided, when a handful of men decided they would put the mystery to rest. It would be remembered as the Woburn Walk incident. And it would never, ever be explained. The gathering on July 18, 1929, 5 men assembled outside the sealed workshop. They were not adventurers or mystics but respectable citizens. 2 constables, a journalist, an electrician, and a clerk from the Home Office. Their purpose was simple: enter, inspect, document. End the superstition once and for all. The journalist, Henry Blackwell, wrote in his notebook before stepping inside, "Tonight I will stand where Mallory stood. I will prove there is nothing but dust and shadows. Fear thrives in silence. Let us answer it with light." It was the last full sentence he ever wrote. Breaking the seal, the lead panels over the workshop had warped with damp. With crowbars and effort, the men pried them loose, one by one. The fog seemed to thicken as each plate fell away. Inside, the air was heavy, electric. Dust lay thick, yet the faint smell of ozone lingered, as if the machine had only just been shut down. They lit lanterns. Shadows swayed. In the center of the room, where Mallory's machine had once stood, there was only the faint outline of scorched wood in a perfect circle. The boards within the circle were blackened, yet untouched by fire. One constable muttered, "It's colder in there." Indeed, the circle's air shimmered slightly, like a heat haze, but the temperature was frigid. The first signs, they began their inspection methodically. The electrician tested the wiring. The clerk took notes. Blackwell snapped photographs. But within minutes, anomalies emerged. The lantern flames bent inward, toward the circle, as if drawn by a hidden current. Their watches stopped simultaneously, each one freezing at 10:14 p.m., the precise minute of Mallory's disappearance. Then came the sound. At first a low vibration, felt more in the chest than heard. Then a hum, familiar to every neighbor who had whispered of the workshop in the months prior. One constable reported later, before he too was lost, that it was not merely sound, but voices layered within the hum. Like a crowd speaking in unison, just beyond comprehension. The circle, despite unease, Blackwell insisted they step into the circle. Science demanded it. One by one, they did. The moment they crossed the blackened boards, every lantern extinguished. Darkness swallowed them. Panic flared, until, impossibly, a dim light rose from the circle itself, bluish and shifting, casting their faces in unnatural glow. In that light, they saw movement. Shadows, not their own, stretching long against the walls, twisting in ways their bodies did not. The clerk swore he saw Edward Mallory standing at the circle's center, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. When he reached out, Mallory dissolved like smoke. The humming grew louder. The fracture suddenly, the air split. Witnesses outside later described hearing a crack, like timber snapping, though no wood had broken. Inside, the men saw the boards ripple like water. The circle deepened, becoming a pit, or perhaps a window. Through it, they glimpsed something. Not another room, not another world, but a vast expanse of shifting color, geometry folding upon itself. And within that expanse, shapes, elongated, faceless, watching. One constable screamed. Another tried to flee, but the doorway of the workshop had vanished, replaced by seamless wall. They were trapped. The disappearance, what happened next, survives only in fragments. The electrician, Samuel Draper, stumbled from the building at dawn, incoherent, eyes bloodshot. He muttered only one thing before collapsing dead on the street: "He pulled us in." Of the other 4 men, no trace was ever found. Blackwell's notebook lay in the dust, open to a single line, scrawled in shaking hands, "We are not alone here." The photographs he had taken that night were developed but showed only blank exposures, except one. The final plate displayed the interior of the workshop, lanterns burning, men standing nervously near the circle. But in the corner, partly obscured by shadow, a tall figure loomed, impossibly tall, stretching toward the ceiling, its head bent as though it did not quite fit within the frame. No one present that night matched its description. Aftermath: the Woburn Walk incident was sealed from public record. Officials declared the missing men lost in a structural collapse. The building was condemned and bricked over. But the neighborhood remembered. For months afterward, passers-by claimed to hear screams echoing faintly through the walls, always at 10:14 p.m. Others saw silhouettes at the upper windows, though no floorboards remained intact. Children dared each other to touch the bricks, insisting they pulsed with faint warmth. And those who had lived in Bloomsbury long enough swore that, on quiet nights, Edward Mallory's voice drifted from the ruins, whispering in tones both pleading and triumphant, "I crossed, and now so must you." The Woburn Walk incident silenced the skeptics. For some, it proved Mallory had succeeded, that he had opened a door no man was meant to. For others, it was only tragedy piled upon tragedy, a cautionary tale of obsession. But for the families of the men who entered that night, it was neither proof nor legend. It was a loss. Terrible, inexplicable, permanent loss. And though the official record closed the matter, Londoners whispered a different truth. Mallory's circle had not closed. It had only widened. By 1930, the world had moved on. London rebuilt, newspapers sought fresher scandals, and Edward Mallory's name slipped from headlines into rumor, from rumor into legend. But the story did not end with him. For some say it has never ended at all. The bricked house, the workshop at Woburn Walk, was sealed, bricked over, and declared unfit for habitation. No tenant was ever assigned. No business dared to reopen it. Yet even sealed, it was not silent. Residents of adjacent buildings reported scratching noises at night, like fingernails on stone. Others swore they heard faint tapping, as though someone on the inside still sought a way out. In 1932, masons repairing nearby structures refused to work past dusk, claiming the bricks of Mallory's workshop vibrated faintly under their hands, as if the wall itself was breathing. The vanishing archives for decades, officials attempted to maintain a record. But piece by piece, the paper trail withered. Autopsy notes from Constable Ridley's death were misfiled. Blackwell's photographs disappeared from the archives. Even the sealed fragments of Mallory's machine, once stored at the Royal Institution, could not be located when requested in 1947. It was as though the case itself resisted being remembered. One archivist later confessed, "Every time I tried to collate the files, I'd find myself drifting, staring at the wall. Hours gone, nothing done. It was as if the story wanted to stay hidden." Survivors who didn't survive a handful of witnesses lived long enough to speak in old age. None of them found peace. Samuel Draper, the electrician who staggered out of the workshop, lived only a day. Dr. Farnsworth, the psychiatrist who called it hysteria, spent his later years in private care, drawing endless circles that folded inward, again and again. The clerk's widow swore her husband returned home one night in 1935, 5 years after his official disappearance. He stood at the foot of their bed, pale, unmoving, whispering in a voice that was his but not his, "I never left the circle." When she blinked, he was gone. The folklore over time, Woburn Walk became a place of quiet avoidance. Children whispered of Mallory's door. Students at nearby universities dared each other to walk past the bricked workshop at night. Some swore if you placed your ear to the wall at exactly 10:14 p.m., you'd hear Mallory's last breath. Others said you'd hear your own name whispered back. And though the world at large forgot, Bloomsbury carried the tale like an inherited wound. The academic silence occasionally, a curious historian or parapsychologist resurrected the case. But without fail, their work ended in silence. Manuscripts left unfinished. Lectures cancelled without explanation. In the 1960s, one American researcher announced he would publish a definitive study of Mallory. Before it went to print, he vanished during a trip to London. His hotel room was found empty, suitcase open, typewriter still humming. The manuscript was never recovered. What remains today? The bricked facade still stands. Passers-by hurry along the street, unaware, or unwilling to look too closely. But on certain nights, when the fog gathers thick, those who know the story claim they feel it again. That subtle pressure in the mind, as if being observed from beyond the bricks. And a few, the unlucky few, say the hum returns. Low, steady, pulsing. If you follow it, they say, the wall seems to bend, ever so slightly, as though inviting you to step through. Edward Mallory dreamed of breaking boundaries, of proving there was more than the world we see. In 1928, he succeeded. But what found him, was not knowledge, not triumph, but something else. Something vast. Something patient. And though Mallory is gone, the door he opened remains. Perhaps bricked. Perhaps buried. But never closed.